System psychology, which is closely related to systems theory and is heavily inspired by systems theory, looks at human behavior and experience within complex systems. So it's really taking systems to the psychological and experiential level and perspective. There are several unwritten laws of system psychology. The first one is the understanding the only person you can change is yourself. But number two, when you change and you make a change in yourself, others around you have to respond to that change. When one part of the system changes, the feedback loop will change, which changes the entire system. But it takes time. Feedback loops have delays. As I've mentioned before, most studies show that change takes about 3 to 5 years for individuals, 15 to 20 years for organizations or family units, and about 4 to 5 generations for countries. And number three, almost all systems are going to resist change. Systems like to stay in homeostasis. Individuals are going to push against change, and resistance to change is natural. As leaders, that is something that should be understood and worked through rather than pushed aside and shoved under the rug. Number four, hope and positive action are the antidotes to system despair. Positive influence changes the system and it changes the feedback loop. And we'll get into some of that when we talk about John Gottman's research in a second. We all tend towards habitual patterns of behavior and communication in our daily lives. And if my habitual patterns are negative and are beginning to harm the system, there has to be a change in the patterns or the system will dissipate and dissolve. Social systems, whether it's a family unit or an organization, can get stuck in what is referred to as a trance due to some of the behavioral patterns that find equilibrium that are either healthy or unhealthy. Some of the questions that a leader should ask are, what kind of trance is my social system, my organization, or my team in? Is the trance open, positive, and creative? Or is it closed and rigid and unengaged? Because the dynamic of an unhealthy and unsustainable system is when there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of talk about meaningless things or people in negative ways. There's gossip, stereotyping, racism. Healthy systems are when people talk about meaning and they talk about others in a positive light. And they talk about positive changes that can take place in the system. The area of systems psychology that is really important to the field of organizational theory is in the area of family systems theory. Family systems theory takes into account the entire system, and the individual is just one small part of the system instead of taking into account only the individual. One example would be before family systems theory, there would be a child that was misbehaving, and the therapist would analyze the child and the child only. In family systems, the therapist takes into account the entire family system and the environment that the child is raised in. The system needs to be tweaked, not so much the individual. So the parents and the other family members are called into the meeting as well. It's important to understand that psychology made almost no headway in the areas of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, alcoholism, and addiction in general until systems theory became an important piece. Once psychology began to take into account the systems that individuals resided under, dramatic changes began to take place. So why is this important? Because at the foundation of a lot of organizational research is system psychology and family systems theory. Family systems theory is being used as the building blocks for organizational behavior theory. And I have several colleagues right now doing research regarding org theory and org change, and a great deal of their literature reviews and their research uses systems theory and family systems theory as its foundation. John Gottman out of the University of Washington is currently one of the leading scholars in family systems research, and his work is widely used in org behavior. some findings and examples of his work, John Gottman found that 80% of men who got divorced shared one quality. He also found that 80% of women that got divorced shared one quality. 80% of men who got divorced didn't want to share influence with or from the feminine. So in other words, there was an overpowerment and domination of the masculine. 80% of women that got divorced shared one quality, and that was a high contempt for the masculine. And these go hand in hand. I hope you can see that. Because if I don't want to share influence with you, you're going to have a high sense of contempt for me, and vice versa. So I hope you can see that feedback loop and that cyclical behavioral pattern that needs to be broken. John Gottman also defined sustainable systems as consisting of positive sentiment override. Positive sentiment override was defined as 5 to 10 positive interactions for every one negative interaction. He also said that unsustainable systems had negative sentiment override, which he defined as 5 to 10 negatives for every one positive. Gottman would record couples having conversations in his research lab, and he would record the negative and positive statements, nonverbal cues, etc. And he did this with hundreds of couples, and found that couples in sustainable relationships overwhelmingly had positive sentiment override, whereas couples that did not have sustainable relationships had negative sentiment override. Therefore, family units with positive sentiment override and feedback loops that are based on positive interactions are more sustainable. So how does this relate to leaders and leadership? In my research with CEOs and presidents around the country, they almost always mention the importance of positive and open cultures where there is a free flow of information and ideas and communication. Our economy is interconnected, not only throughout itself, but with all the other economies globally. It's not a closed system, and it's not a system that can be controlled. So all of a sudden, creating an ethical and positive culture is more and more important. And that is almost the only thing that you can do. Because when you can't control something, the best thing you can do is create a culture that empowers and grows people to do the right thing and inspires people to do the right thing. And that begins with the leader. The leader is responsible for setting the example of what the organizational system should look like and should strive for and should value. The leader has a huge influence over the system. If the leader is toxic, then the system will be unsustainable. What is going to influence the organizational and global systems for the better in the coming years are leaders that can create and influence positive sentiment override.